Good morning and welcome to Community Connections with Children's Services Council of St. Lucie County. I am just one of your sort of remote hosts, Sean Boyle, and with me is
Ashley Mock.
and I say
Remote.
I say sort of actually because we are clearly not in the radio show, or we're not in the radio station, right? We're
No,
actually
both
pre-recording
at
on a
work.
Tuesday.
Both
What'd you
in the
say?
office. Both in the office, but not together.
Yeah, it's strange because while we are not together for the radio show, we're separated by about 20 feet. But in order to pull this off on Zoom, we didn't want to be close together doing, on one screen
Too
because,
complicated.
yeah, we got to do social distancing. I didn't want to wear a mask while doing a radio program. So
We're good.
we're kind of remote-ish
A little
still.
bit.
But welcome to the half-hour radio program that's all about connecting you, the listener, to things that are available for children and families in St. Lucie County to support our children and families and to improve their lives. Now, we at the Children's Services Council of St. Lucie County, Ashley and I and the entire team, not radio show professionals. We just learned Zoom about 3 weeks ago. But what we are, or what we do at the Children's Services Council that I believe that we excel at and work for every day is 5 things. And those 5 things are: 1, to make sure every baby's a healthy baby; 2, to stop child abuse before it happens; 3, to keep kids off the streets; 4, to keep them in school; and 5, keep them off drugs, alcohol, and other risky behaviors by offering programs and resources for all families in our community.
And Sean talked about those priority areas. The best way to find information about them is on our website, which is cscslc.org. We have a list of all of our funded programs there, along with contact information for them. And pertinent to this time of year, we have a list of our summer camps there. So our summer camps, most of them opened last week. They started serving kids. They are following social distancing. Some of them have some specific accommodations that are in place. We're trying to make sure that our website has that information, but if you are still looking for somewhere for your kids to go, you can visit that page on our website. You can find their information, and I would recommend that you reach out to them directly to find out what days they're seeing which kids, if there's special rules that you need to follow, because it is changing and they're doing the best they can, but most of them are open taking kids right now.
Yeah, and we used to always say, if you notice that your child's home all the time now, it's the summer, but every child's been home all the time for the last 8 weeks. So
Yep, they're home all the time.
Maybe they're not logging on to Canvas or Edgenuity or whatever it may be. But if you are looking for a safe place to go, and I really want to emphasize the fact that all of our programs that are serving kids directly are following safety protocols. They're taking temperatures to make sure that the kids don't have temperatures. The staff are wearing masks. They are making sure that kids stay 6 feet apart. They are doing everything they can to make sure that not only the kids have a fun and learning environment, but they're safe. And when they come back to you, parents and grandparents, they're safe as well, because that's most important. So if you've been a little bit hesitant, just know that the programs that are serving kids directly are taking safety precautions, because we know that's front and center of a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, and real quick, I just want to mention too, we talked about making sure that they're in a learning environment, and we realize that there are some families or parents that either are not capable of or are still a little hesitant about sending their kids to a summer experience, and we obviously understand that. We are releasing information this week that will have some specific options for parents. We've got a partnership through our campaign for grade level reading that's exciting. So we're going to get some information up about that on our website. I know we're recording this show, but it's not airing till Sunday, so I just want to make sure we get everything worked out. But there's some stuff that we're going to be able to do through some partnerships that we have that will give parents access to some learning games and apps and things like that. So stay tuned for that. We'll be releasing more information about it. Our Facebook page is a great place to stay up to date with all of that.
Yeah, we're wanting to make that big because we know, especially if you have younger kids, it's tough to keep them entertained. And we think we've got a summer free solution for those families that maybe aren't comfortable sending their kids to camps but want to keep them entertained for periods of time. So we're excited about it. And I know we want to make a big splash. And it's not a water thing. We want to make a big splash with it. So like Ashley said, stay tuned. Ashley, there's a couple of observations that I want to make.
One.
Can I make that? One, we haven't said we haven't mentioned the census yet, and shame on us. So they have it, just so you know, in a non-pandemic year, something we don't get to say very often. In a non-pandemic year, the census would have been wrapped up by now. I believe it was going to be wrapped up by April 1st, but they've extended it. And the good news is it gives a lot more people opportunity to log onto their computer, take the 3 minutes it takes to fill it out, and make sure that you're counted, because it means so much to every community. Obviously, we're mostly concerned about St. Lucie to make sure that we're represented fully, if I said that right, and to make sure that we're getting our fair share of dollars, both at the state and federal level. And that all happens and starts with you, completing the census.
It's super easy. You and I both did it. It took about 3 minutes maybe, but it's available online. It's a super simple click through, answer questions. No special information that you need to have with you when you do that. But we do want to make sure that everyone gets counted. We know that historically children are undercounted, and obviously that's super important to us. So please make sure that you get that done. And if you have questions about it, reach out to us. We can try to help you, point you in the right direction, make sure that you get what you need.
And then the other observation, and this is a little bit more lighthearted, is, if people know you and I, and, they see us out either at work or in the public, we usually don't wear glasses. But
No.
so if you're a radio listener and you've jumped onto Zoom and you're like, wow, that's totally
Huh.
not what I thought they look like.
Huh.
You and I both have been wearing glasses a lot because we're staring at screens all the time. And
All
even for
the
this radio
time.
program.
Yes, literally all the time. But these are my fancy blue light blocking glasses. So I wear them when I stare at a computer, which lately has been frequently. So also I think they make me look smart. So
Well, there you go. And I'll just, not that we want to be vain, but part of the reason why I wear the glasses is, one, because I got to do a little, stuff behind the scenes here, and I can't read it otherwise. And quite frankly, it hides how tired I am. So
agreed.
it's a win-win. On that note, because nobody cares about the fact that we're wearing glasses, more importantly, I'm going to go ahead and bring in our guest.
All right, so I'll do a little backdrop then. So if you listened to the show last week, or saw anything that we shared on Facebook about it, you kind of heard us start a conversation that we felt was important. And obviously our focus is on children and families, and with everything that's going on regarding equality and equity, with racial disparities that are happening in our world at the moment. And we wanted to make sure that we were having that conversation as well. And so today we're really lucky that we get to continue that conversation, still with Crystal Morris from Tykes and Teens, who has been, Crystal, I feel like someone should give you a big hug. I'm sure you are exhausted from a lot of, I know that we are not the only people that are coming to you and asking questions. So thank you in advance for everything that you're doing to make sure that this conversation is happening. But also joining us this week is Kim Eardley from Families of the Treasure Coast, who is doing some really awesome work in this arena, specifically for teenagers and their parents. So we're excited to get to talk about that. But thank you both for joining us to kind of keep this conversation going.
Definitely.
It's interesting. We introduced Crystal last week and said, we're getting to know Crystal. Now I feel safe to say that she's become in the good friend status, because we've had that many conversations and have been that honest with each other. So I'm moving her into the good friend status.
There we go.
There you go. And then Kim, I'm going to reference Saturday Night Live. So they have like alumni that have hosted Saturday Night Live, and there's like platinum status. Like if you've been on the show hosted more than like 5 times, you get like platinum status. Kim is like double platinum status on our radio program. So
that's probably
Kim.
Coming for your space, Kim. Coming for your space.
Yeah. Crystal's done 2 weeks, two spots in 2 weeks. She's coming after you, Kim. She's definitely coming after you. So where and Ashley's absolutely right. Where we kind of last left off was the start of a conversation. And we really kind of centered around and focused around how to have these conversations with your kids, because kids listen and hear everything. and we kind of left off with, be honest with them, educate them, give them the space, answer honestly, but more importantly, just start, which I'm reminded of because I can see that in Crystal's background there. Just start. So that was what we did last week. So as Ashley said, we're continuing it. And one of the reasons why we wanted both Crystal and Kim on the show is because, the week that was, if you will, I'm sure everybody probably had some type of conversation about what is happening about racism and equity and equality, and, throw in that, the continuing pandemic, throw into that all the other stuff. That's a lot to talk about for families. And so we were on a call with a lot of our providers last week, and it wasn't related, but we just said, hey, out of curiosity, and shame on me for not knowing this, memorized for every program. I'm like, do you talk about, the importance of equity and equality? And not surprisingly, a lot of our programs have that built into their curriculum, particularly our after school programs. But Kim brought something to our attention that she's been planning and rolling out. And we thought that this would be a great segue to help promote it, to encourage people to participate, to talk about it, and then transition to how do we have these conversations or continue to have these conversations with families. So does that sound like a good place to start, guys?
That sounds great.
All right. So Kim, talk to us about what you're planning and why it's important, and then we'll talk a little bit more globally.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Sean. We are doing a presentation called How to Talk to Your Child About Racism. This is going to be a recorded presentation that we're going to put up on our website, and we're going to utilize family members that have been through our programs, are already working with us, who have had these conversations recently or are having problem being comfortable talking with their children about race, and have actually come to us. Of course, like you said, we've been doing this conversation in our own households, but I feel that it's important, and our organization feels it's important, that we continue these conversations in the community as a whole and keep them in a positive way that the parents are comfortable talking to their kids. So the presentation is really going to focus on, first and foremost, looking at our own personal bias, our own value system, because we truly understand that if we're going to talk to our children openly and honestly, we first have to assess our own bias, and we first have to check our own comfort levels. And one of the things our parents really are not comfortable with is how to talk to their kids openly and honestly about this topic. How much do they tell them? What do they tell them? How far do they go? So we're looking at it, doing this in an age-appropriate way for all kids, because we want our parents to start talking to their kids about race and differences from the beginning. It should be organic, and it should be simple, and it should be like any other developmental milestones and strategies we have for our kids. It should begin early and begin through their whole life. So we're going to do that, but we're also going to bring in a diverse group of youth, so that we have both the parents in this discussion and youth in the discussion. And that way we can really get down to the way the generations see this issue too. It's definitely, the kids see this so much different than parents, and parents have so much more bias, and then even our kids don't recognize bias. So there's a lot to really dig into and get those conversations started. So I'm sorry if I went too far, but that's going to be, we're going to be doing live snippets on Facebook and Instagram, with the presentation being up on our website.
I think it's really interesting, Kim. I know it's something that you guys really have sort of founded a lot of your programs on with Families of the Treasure Coast, is that kids want to have these conversations with their parents. And parents don't want to talk to their kids about it. And it's not just about racism. It's about all the things that you guys, kind of focus on: drugs, sex, all of that, everything that's happening in their lives. They want their parents to be the ones talking to them about it, and their parents aren't comfortable having those conversations.
That is so true. Even today, talking with a parent this morning, first thing, it was a different topic, but I said, well, have you talked about, and it was about drugs and alcohol. And I was like, well, have you talked about a certain incident? And she says, well, no, he's too young. We wouldn't talk about that yet. And it's about identifying ways to talk to them that are age appropriate, like I was saying before. But you're right, parents are just uncomfortable and a lot of times turn the blind eye. So that's why those values are so important, that we identify what the house values are, what the personal values are of the parent, and that we help them journey back through their own childhood and their own upbringing to have those understandings of where their belief system comes from before we can even start on educating them.
You know, you just remind me of something that Crystal said last week was, you know, you need to be uncomfortable. Uncomfortable
Right?
is an okay spot to be in right now.
That is
If we're going to
excellent.
be honest with each other, it's where a lot of people need to sit right now and learn and listen. So I say that because I'm sensing a common theme, whether it be about
All of it
racism,
has to be
equity,
uncomfortable.
equality, or sex or drugs. Uncomfortableness is not necessarily always a bad thing.
That's so true. It is. And you know, there's tons of resources out there to help parents. And that's the other thing we want to do is make sure that we get the parents the support they need to have these ongoing conversations. And the other thing, if I could just get this out, and I'm sure Crystal will back me up on this, a lot of our kids want to talk to their parents, but the parents just want to preach at the kids. So communication skills, we really have to teach those. And those aren't just in your parent-child relationship. We're teaching communication skills that parents can take into the community, that they can have with their spouse, that they can have better communication at work. I mean, these are just human relationship skills that we're teaching.
Yeah. We talked about it some last week where I mentioned 7% of what we say is heard. The bulk of what our kids are seeing, it's what we do, it's what we model. So it's great that you're gonna have that specific conversation, how to effectively communicate with your kids so that if you're talking one way, they're understanding it. My analogy, and I'm very judgmental when it comes to steak. I eat my steak either medium or medium rare. If you eat a well-done steak, I think you should stick to chicken. But anyways, that's a different day. But don't look at me with judgment, Sean. But I always say, if we go to a restaurant together and we order steak and you order a well-done steak and I order a medium or a medium rare steak and they give me your steak, I'm gonna look at it as it's not done well. But for you, it was done well. But for me, it's for the garb. Anyways, it's not done well. So what's communication? What is done to you? You might think you're effectively communicating, but your child perceives it as preaching. And because there's no middle ground and you're not speaking each other's language, then you've completely had a wasted 30 minutes because none of you left feeling any more educated. And another thing that you said that I really loved, you're having this conversation about racism with parents, but you're starting it by identifying the bias that exists. We're not seeing overt racism every single day in our community, in our households, in our streets, but we see the passive aggressive implicit biases that have the same impact as those big movements. We're not seeing the sheets, but we're still seeing the sentiments behind the sheets. So it's good to start off with people identifying their bias. I'm not sure if you're introducing it in your classes, but Harvard IAT exams, the implicit bias test, is a great place to start, because bias is not something that you can sit and say, oh, let me reflect on my implicit biases today. So Harvard has that as a tool that is completely anonymous, that you can just Google Harvard implicit bias test. It takes about 5-10 minutes and it reveals your bias. And you might be uncomfortable with what it says, and that's fine. A bias doesn't mean you're a racist. A bias just means that you come from what you've been exposed to, your worldview causes you to think and act in a specific way, your attitudes, your stereotypes, that's what it reveals. But if we're gonna make any type of change, we need to know where we're starting from, and you start with that bias test.
Yeah.
You know, I think actually we will, I've taken that test. I think I took it twice, once a long time ago and then just recently. I think because it is free, I think that's something we can post on our Facebook page so that people, because you're right, just because you have biases doesn't mean that you're racist. It just means that that's what you kind of grew up with. And a lot of times you don't know it until you know, like have an objective look at it, if you will.
Well, I'm going to agree with Crystal and take it one step further. I think that our community as a whole, we need to have everybody start talking about this too. And I know that's what you're doing, Crystal, but I see so much of it on social media. And those are people who are wanting to defend that they're not, or they're defending themselves. I'm not racist, but yet at the same time, they're posting things that could be considered racist or are considered racist.
Mhm.
And that's really because they're not understanding their own bias.
I have this hierarchy of communication, effective to non-effective, and I will tell you at the bottom of the non-effective is social media. To me,
Social media posts.
it's such a bad form of communication, such a bad form.
And actually, what I was going to say was what I have noticed recently, just specifically in the last couple of weeks, is that people are getting called out on their biases. And I think that's something that didn't happen before a lot of this, but there are people who are being challenged. And I think that's how change happens. But I've noticed it a lot in the last week or so where someone will say something and someone will come after them and say, that's not okay. Like, you can't do that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's how we rid our
If you-
community of bias, definitely.
That's exhausting, though. If you go about your day doing that, if you've ever,
Yes.
I don't know about what your Facebook feed looks like, but I turned it on. I'm like, yeah, not today. Not going on it today.
I told my husband, like, there's going to be a time where one day I just say everything that I want. Like, I reply all the replies that I have stored up to people, and it's not going to be cute, but it's going to happen.
That's the day Sean is going to unfriend you for a minute and then bring you back so that has no impact on your relationship.
Yeah, that's true.
While we're talking about social media, though, I really want to make sure that parents understand that we're not going to do away with social media. It's not going away. And our kids are consuming it. That is where they are communicating. That is what they're getting their information, where they're getting their information and what they're posting. So we have to learn to use that to educate. And if we're going to bring it all back full circle, it's all about creating or giving our children those critical thinking skills that they're going to need. So it really does matter.
And Kim, I'm gonna pivot the conversation here in a minute. But Kim, from your experience of working with teens, most teens don't use Facebook, though, right?
No, they're not using Facebook.
Facebook is for us, right? And I think
Yes.
that's why I can't stand it sometimes.
So it's either TikTok or Snapchat. But
Okay, yeah.
But I got to tell you, having older teens, they're showing me what they're seeing on Snapchat, and it can be disturbing.
Oh,
yeah.
I have the Snapchat app, but I can honestly tell you it's been at least a good 6 months since I've opened it, and I refuse to download the TikTok. Although I have a buddy of mine who says it's awesome, so I'm being tempted, but I haven't downloaded it yet.
There's
You won't
no
see me
coming
dancing
back.
on TikTok, though. I guarantee you that.
I've
In
deleted
TikTok's
it
defense, I only have it because my 9-year-old daughter looks for every challenge she can do. But in their defense, I am seeing tons of social action posts being made by young people on TikTok. So it's the videos of dancing and the fun stuff has taken a back seat to social action. And that for me is encouraging because that is being led by the next generation of advocates that we're going to see.
And while I make fun of social media, and to your point, Kim, it's obviously here to stay, and we use it as a tool for communication for our work. Obviously, I use it as a tool so that my mom knows what's going on in my world too. But I think my biggest complaint with Facebook are memes that state something crazy, usually not fact-based, and it's taken as gospel. That's the frustrating part for me. All right, so that's my 2 cents. That's my soapbox. So let's real quick. In the few minutes that we have left, I want to talk about, so we live in this world now where kids are home for the summer, but really they've been home for the last 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And we have a pandemic, and now we have this moment in history that we're experiencing. And whether we want to label it as trauma or not, it's a lot for kids to take in. So how do we recognize and see perhaps that kids are having trauma dealing with it? And as parents, how do we address and or talk about it?
All right. So starting with the moment of history, this is not a moment in history. We're just seeing it a lot more because now cameras are there. But because we're seeing it more, because it's more visible, it's in our face, you're having kids who are processing what an adult can't process. Because if we look at the biological makeup, the brain architecture, their prefrontal cortex is not developed. So you have a child who is 9, 10, 12, 15, and they're now processing experiences of someone that's lived for 50 years. We're not going to see children who are going to be sitting and be thinking and speaking coherently and being fully compliant. We're going to see children releasing their stress response, releasing their trauma response. And for some, that could be easily misconstrued as maladaptive behaviors, as that child is just bad, right? You have EBD units and you have varying exceptionality units, and then you're now going to have the BAD units just for the bad kids. But it's not being bad, it's they don't know how to effectively process every single feeling they're going through. In 1999, there was a study called the ACEs study, and that bases everything that we do for trauma-informed care. And they looked at 10 regions of trauma that we can go through, but it didn't include medical trauma, which is what we're seeing from this pandemic. And it didn't include racial inequalities and racial disparities, which we're seeing with this racial pandemic that we're highlighting now. So kids are going to come back, if we go back to school in August or just in your homes, they're going to start displaying a lot of different behaviors. For some, it could be those upfront challenging behaviors. For others, it could be regressing and not wanting to talk, completely disassociating. But as parents, as teachers, as community leaders, as people in general, we have to mirror or download our calm. We have to be self-regulated so that we can put that in our children, so that we can teach them how to regulate during this period. Because if trauma is not checked in a child who is still developing, it turns into those social and emotional impairments. So that means they're going to pull apart from their family units or from their social units, or they're going to show those challenging behaviors. But it also impacts their ability to learn, because the prefrontal cortex doesn't get to develop in the way it should develop, because trauma destroys the brain. So now you have a child that's not learning the same way his peers or her peers are learning. They're going to start showing those behavioral risks, those health risks. So that's why we'll see people with trauma. If you look at all the big diseases, cancer and everything else, you'll see a long history of trauma, because trauma leads you to not learning the same, to developing those habits that cause you to get all of these increased likelihood of these diseases, and it causes early death. So we see this as COVID, and we see this as this racial tension that is existing. But if we ignore the impact that trauma is going to bring and how it causes, if you have 6 or more traumatic instances, it shortens your lifespan by 20 years. There is a huge fallout that can happen. And it's not just limited to COVID and to race relations. We have to look at the root cause. People are marching and protesting and burning and looting and everything else, but it's tied to something. Not what are they doing, what happened to cause them to do it. And until we start dealing with that underlying issue of unmitigated trauma, this is just the beginning. So this talk is extremely important, because it sheds light on all the areas that we really need to address finally, and not sweep it under the rug. This is what comes when we sweep it under the rug, what we're seeing today.
So Kim, in 3 minutes or less, so how do parents, talk to their kids and address this trauma?
First and foremost, they need to check their own bias, make sure they educate themselves, and be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then I would say to them, wait for those teachable moments. Don't go in full force and say, okay, I'm going to go talk to my kids about race right now. Wait until there is something around you that triggers that conversation. Maybe it's what they saw on the news, or maybe it's just as simple as asking an open-ended question. Did you see that video on Snapchat today? Did you see? What do you think of? That's the other thing, is getting parents to ask those open-ended questions, but being okay with what the answer is too. So first and foremost, get educated, check your bias, listen, and then Be okay with what you hear back and no arguing. How about that? Is that what 3 minutes?
And if you
Pretty
need
good.
help, call Families of the Treasure Coast.
Yes. 772-302-3147. Or
If
our
I could,
website.
if I could say one thing, when Kim was speaking, it triggered it for me. So we just came off being teachers, right? We were parents, but now we became teachers, and we were so concerned with doing all this school stuff. But one of the biggest ways to mitigate trauma, I know I said it, mitigated trauma leads to all these negative outcomes. How we stop trauma is through connections. So I encourage parents this summer, do connection building activities. We tend to say children are attention seeking. They're not attention seeking, they're connection seeking. So this might be a great opportunity for you to teach your child a new skill, practice a hobby that they enjoy, but do something that is going to build connections, because it doesn't just improve your relationship, it improves the wiring in those in that brain and on those neural pathways. That's what regenerates the brain. The damage that is done, we can reverse it, because that brain does not stop forming until a child is about 25, 26. There is still a lot of time to form that brain structure, but it comes in the context of relationships.
And I think, and you know, this happened last week. We're out of time, but I think that's a perfect segue to wrap all this up, because we talked before we brought you in about the importance of making sure your child is doing something this summer. And we have summer offerings that people can investigate. And I promise you, they will make that, they do those connections that Crystal just talked about in those summer camps. So if your child isn't doing anything, make sure that you check those out. But I like the idea of what you both said, Kim, to have those open conversations, meet the child where the child is at, as opposed to saying, now is the day, you know, we have scheduled this time to talk about this. That won't go over well, I promise you. But also what Crystal said is, you know, when you've had, after you've had those conversations, you're continuing that education to make sure that you're connecting with your child, make sure that you're connecting and giving them a positive outlook. And I know something that we did when our kids were young were not only connections of new ideas and new things, but also connections with other adults that we knew were a positive influence on our children. So for example, a good friend of ours, we introduced our daughter to, and they have a great relationship. And quite honestly, she listens to her sometimes more than they listen to us. So I like this idea of connections.
Definitely.
So I'm going to thank you both for coming on, and also apologize that the time went so quickly, but we knew that was going to happen, but this one went really, really quick. And we want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching. You know, it's a weekly radio program on 104.5 The Flame every Sunday at 10 a.m. And because we figured out how to use Zoom, we're going to make it a television show for as long as we can. But remember, through all this, it's our children, our community, our future. More than ever, we're all in this together. We'll see you next time. All right, so while we wrapped up the show, we're going to continue the conversation with, as Ashley just said, the show after the show. So let's talk about that connection a little bit more if we can.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to say, you know, and Crystal talked about how important those connections are, but a lot of our listeners know that my kids were adopted from foster care. So there was a lot of history that they had before we even met them. That has created some challenges for us as parents. But I really think that through being home with us during the whole coronavirus last few months, in having conversations with them about that time, I think that time has been really special for them because of the connections that we were able to make as a family. My husband stayed home from work during that time so that he could help with their schooling. And it's probably the longest amount of time that we have all spent together. And I truly believe that when they look back at this time, that's what they're going to remember, is the time that we spent together, not that there was a pandemic happening. And, you know, I think that's really important because it gave us this opportunity to foster some of those connections that my kids didn't get to have early on because of their past.
And definitely, I'm thinking as you talked, so you said it before and I thought of something, and now this time I'm thinking of something completely different. But growing up, do you remember any specific lesson that you learned in school? Or do you remember the way your teachers acted toward you, the way they treated you, all of that stuff? So I have two distinct memories of the teacher that I hated the most. I'm allowed to say that, yeah. The teacher I disliked the most, but the teacher that caused me to be an educator. I grew up in Jamaica, so corporal punishment was a thing. We got spanked with belts and rulers and all that. And she did it one day, saying that I failed a spelling test, which I did not fail, but by her standards, I failed, hence getting the punishment. And then the next memory I have was her. I got my clothes dirty. She lived near the school. She took me to her house. She put on her daughter's clothes on me. And I stayed there until my dad picked me up later that day and took me home. So she shaped a lot of how I was when I was an educator. Kids don't remember these lessons that we spend time. I know when I was trying to talk to one of my kids about what's going on, even though this is what I do, I drafted a agenda that I'm gonna hit these topics. I brought up the documentaries, I cued them to where I needed them to be. And then the kid walked off saying, I don't want to talk about this, Mom. And that wrecked like 3 hours of prep work. They don't remember that stuff, but they remember the feelings that we carry on and how we treat them in that moment. So this is the season of connection. It's not necessarily the season of, I'm going to make sure that you've mastered this content. But if I see someone modeling their expectation for me, I'll be easier to follow what you model than what you say. And you get to model that while spending time intentionally to form those connections.
No, go ahead, Kim. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to bring that back to the emotional piece of that too for parents. I think when this first all started back in early March, late February, a lot of the work we did was around parents being able to manage their emotions so that they could help and support their children. A lot of our parents have trauma history themselves that have never been addressed. So it's helping them recognize their own trauma, helping them work through it, getting support, but also how to manage their emotions when they're talking to their children. So many of my parents get their feelings hurt by their own children.
All the time.
Right? And then their reaction can be quite negative, which actually hurts the child back, which isn't intentional. I know it's not, but it's a matter of helping the parents realize this is going to happen. This doesn't mean it's any impact on your parenting skill or you as a parent. You know, this is what you're seeing, and helping them understand so that they can stay in the moment and be with their child and not cause any damage.
Which is the beauty of what your program does. We know you parent the way you've been parented, you love the way you've been loved, and unless something comes in to cause that second thought of, wait, maybe I wasn't parented the best or the most ideal way, and I want to stop this from happening. We have this thing of generational curse. It's trauma, it's intergenerational trauma that we're passing on, but we've never taken a time to stop and to deal with it because it's hard and it's uncomfortable and it's painful. But the moment we look at it in its true context, this is trauma that wasn't dealt with, then we can open the door for programs like yours to come in and to sit with parents and help them through that, help them name it first. You have to name the emotion to tame the emotion. But name the experiences that they're having, and then we're now building their capacity to use all these different interventions and strategies to make something different for their kids.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because we're all parents here. How many times have you said something or thought something and be like, oh, that's why my mom or dad said that, or I can't believe I said that. That's what my mom or dad said all the time. And Crystal, and I think Kim knows this. A lifetime ago, I used to be a child abuse investigator, and 9 times out of 10, you know, and I think back to this one gentleman. He loved his kid, and he was a single father. He loved his kid. He had one kid, and he got called the Department of Children and Families because he was disciplining his child with an extension cord. And obviously, that's a no-no, but that's the way he was disciplined, and he loved his dad. And that's what his dad did to him. So he didn't know. His dad was a good guy. Yeah, and his dad was a good guy. So, you know, unfortunately, that was one of the easier abuse cases that I had to deal with because it was a simple redirection of, you know, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate on the simplest terms. But I remember that case stays with me. You know, that was 30 years ago. And that case still stays with me because I just remember him, like his face, not understanding what he had done wrong, because, you know, that's what had been passed down generation to generation. And so anyway, that's my 2 cents on that.
And Kim probably knows sometimes that's the hardest parent to try and get them to grow in that area, because I turned out okay. My mom hit me with a shoe or an extension cord or a frying pan or whatever she could get her hand on. I turned out okay. But if we're honest, did we turn out okay? Are there issues within our ability to regulate ourselves? Do we know how to effectively cope? Do we turn to drugs and alcohol to cope? Do we overeat to cope? Do we binge? So are we really okay? But because we've learned to suppress so many things and just to function, we're functional trauma victims. That's what we are. But because we're able to get through and attain whatever degree of success, it gives the appearance that we're okay when we're really not. So we don't see doing the same thing and repeating the cycle as harmful to our kids. So we continue and continue.
And I think, Crystal and Kim, I think you guys both brought up about the connection. And Ashley, you know, I think if we could have communicated to every single parent right when the pandemic hit, and it was chaos, right? Like, what do you mean I can't send my kid to school anymore? Well, you know, if we had communicated to every single parent and said, look, the most important thing is the connection. And the most important thing is the time together, as opposed to, you know, get online and get that done, get online, get that done, you know, and that whole stress. I think for a lot of families, it would have been a redirect, and maybe the school system would have agreed, maybe not, I don't know, but I think it would have caused a lot of parents to rethink about how and where they're concentrating their time. And I say all that because in the fall, who knows what the fall looks like? We don't know if kids are going back to school. So if we can get that message across, my wife's a teacher, and, you know, and they're on, you know, different platforms, and, you know, not every kid went through and completed 100%. Actually, a greater percentage probably didn't. But if we stress the importance of while they're home connecting and listening and all that, I think overall we would say it was a good semester, right?
Yeah.
Or good, whatever it is, quarter or whatever.
I actually had that conversation with Kinley and my children. My daughter was stressing out because my son was so far behind. He was stressing out to the point of becoming obsessive. And it was really just because he just couldn't get the way the classwork was on Canvas, I think was the name of the software.
Yeah.
And at one point, his anxiety was getting so high and it was causing everybody's anxiety. I was like, you know what? I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. What really, really matters to me right now is that everybody is happy and healthy. And that's what matters. And that actually took a lot of the wind out of the sails. And no, he didn't get the grades he normally gets. But you know what? He's happy and we're all happier. And that's what matters.
And that's what matters. I spoke with someone, and I think that's what the school district and every person within the county needs to understand what matters. I spoke with someone that works in this field, and she got a call or an email from the school district saying that they're sending a social worker out to check on the student because their attendance for one class wasn't in, or one service. The attendance for the school portion was in, but for the therapy parts, it wasn't in. So they're sending in an investigator because the parent wasn't responding to the therapist's emails and what would have you. And that was uncomfortable for me to listen to because the kid's attendance is there for the regular day. And I think that was an area that hopefully the school system identified as an area, an opportunity for growth. But I have to brag on one of the schools at my kids. I have 3 kids in 2 different schools, but Bayshore has a self-contained unit for ASD students. And my son's teacher, Miss Anderson, came by and brought him some stuff that I didn't need her to bring because of who my kid is and the mess that he was gonna make in my house. But just her coming and ringing our doorbell with her mask on, saying, "Hey, Caleb, And then she had to take the mask off because she said she needed him to see her face. And my kid was just in heaven and screaming and super happy and couldn't. So I know our school district gets it, and I know our educators get it. It's just for it to be this message that everyone, because Lord knows I gave up on school a long time ago with these kids over this break. My husband did that. I couldn't handle it. It was too much for me. So I'm thinking about my kids. If it's too much for the adult with a master's degree, what about the kids? But I think our school district, when they roll out for next year, it's a great opportunity to do it in a more trauma responsive way. Because now we can't say that our kids don't know what trauma is. They know. They have direct experience, every last one of them, with trauma. And now we need to be there to respond to them, to create that safe space with equity and accountability and trustworthiness, but it has to be the safe space for them to return back to. And we have to prioritize Maslow over Bloom's. This is a time for self-connection and connecting with other people. And I'm not sure if that's going to be found in a standard that's under Bloom's taxonomy.
And we do want to compliment. Hopefully it didn't come across. We weren't criticizing the school district at all, because I think you're right. They did emphasize the connection and kind of get through what you can kind of aspect. But so what you're saying, Crystal, is that it was a great experience, but maybe don't show up with a drum set next time. I'm just kidding.
Glitter's the thing
everywhere.
Glitter, Play-Doh, those are nothing.
But it was a very happy kid. She got him a new kite. I don't know how she knew that I misplaced the last kite. So that was fun, I guess. He enjoyed it. It's not there anymore, though.
But you know what? Like, to that point, that's what he's going to remember. He's going to remember that she came to your house. He's not going to remember that he had to log on and do this assignment. He's going to remember the kite and that she smiled at him and that she showed up. Yep. And that's it. And that's okay.
Time where no one is going anywhere. She took the time out of her day to go and to come and see about him and to actually put eyes. It wasn't good enough for Zoom. She had to put eyes on him. It left a lasting impression on him, but it left a huge impression on us as parents. So I'm super grateful for that.
Yeah.
You might want to check his messages. He might have messaged his teacher to say that you destroyed his kite.
I didn't say that. I positive deniability. Misplaced on a Wednesday when waste management comes by.
I'm going to use that.
And Ashley, you're absolutely right. I guarantee you 20 years from now, when he's doing whatever he's doing and he reflects back about his school year, that's going to be probably one of the first memories that pops to his mind. Because you're right. I couldn't tell you what I remember, what I learned in trigonometry or geometry, but I do remember the connections that I had with teachers. Yeah. I do remember my times tables. I'm pretty good with that.
Oh, good. Can you come teach my fourth grader?
No, because I don't understand. When we were young, we were just told to memorize it.
Yeah.
Now I don't understand how they do it. Hey, I had to work with my kid through algebra all the way to almost pre-calculus, and I had to learn it all over again. There's some great app out there that was fantastic, because it didn't just show you the answer, it showed you all the steps. And I would be like, does this look familiar? Does this look familiar?
My husband told me a funny story. So he's back at work now, and he works at the college, and he was having a conversation with a very prominent educator at the college who was joking that he was trying to help his grandson through this time, like with some of his 4th or 5th grade math. And so they sat down and they worked really hard on it. And, they're taught a lot differently than they were when I was even in school. And the next day the grandson came back to his house and he said, "Hey bud, how'd you do on that quiz?" And he was like, "Pop, I got 4 out of 4 wrong." Oh, wow.
And that's the last time I come to you for tutoring.
All the time.
Full disclosure, my son's math is way past me. He's in 10th grade. I couldn't do his math. Maybe that's part of why I said, you know what? Doesn't matter.
We're good here.
Yeah,
it's called survival, folks. It's called survival and sanity.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Value
All right.
Important.
Well, this has been fun, as always. I'm glad we got a chance to have a little extended conversation. And I won't sign off as we normally do, but I just want to sign off with a big thank you to the both of you for coming on. Crystal, you're nipping on Kim's heels as one of our favorite guests. Kim, you got to step up your game. What's that?
She might be my favorite guest.
Yeah.
I'm coming, Kim. We have to talk after this.
Yes.
And the next show might not have Ashley and I. It might just be you two.
Right.
There we go, Kim. Larry, we're asking for a space.
Yeah.
Have a half hour. We'll take the second half hour.
Yeah, there you go.
And we'll have like a ratings competition.
There we go.
I think actually we'd lose. I think we'd lose handily too. All right, guys. Hey, thanks for coming on. And those of you that's, stayed with us, thanks for continuing to listen.
Thanks, guys.